Hello YouTubers and welcome to the RPN guide to railway photography locations on the Settle-Carlisle Railway. In this video we look at two spectacular locations just next to the famous Blea Moor signal box. In the 1860s the Midland Railway Company took the decision that it needed its own route to the Scottish borders and designed a route which took it over some of England's highest and most difficult countryside. A decade later the result was one of the UK's most spectacular railway lines, the Settle-Carlisle. On a line that's filled with superb locations for railway photography, this extract looks at one of its most impressive sections across Blea Moor. This section of steeply rising moorland extends from the northern end of the famous Ribblehead viaduct over into Dentdale, and apparently proved to be one of the most difficult sections of the line during construction. It's hard to imagine a 2¼ mile stretch of land less suitable for having a railway built across it, and so part of the solution was to build the UK's longest railway tunnel under 1½ miles of it. This is of course the famous Blea Moor Tunnel, which would represent quite an achievement even for 21st century engineers, and therefore remains an astonishing achievement by 19th century engineers. The remaining 3/4 mile section across difficult moorland contains some of the UK's most spectacular locations for railway photography, two of which are explored in this video. The most obvious gateway to locations on Blea Moor is Ribblehead railway station. Rather like several other stations on the route, Ribblehead is actually nowhere near any kind of significant settlement. The line's priority was obviously to provide a route through to Scotland rather than to serve local communities. Nevertheless, Ribblehead station is served by about 7 trains a day in each direction, or 4 on Sundays, and it's about an hour and 20 minutes journey time from both Leeds to the south and Carlisle to the north. The first time you're deposited by a train at Ribblehead station, your thoughts are probably the same as those of the Midland Railway surveyors who came here in the 19th century. Who in their right mind would think of bringing a railway up here? You're completely surrounded by some of the UK's most spectacular scenery, where the only man-made features are the road and the Settle-Carlisle Railway. Standing on Ribblehead station, you're already about 1,000 feet above sea level, and your constant companions are the famous 3 peaks of Whernside, Ingleborough and Pen-y-Ghent. Each of these rises about another 1,400 feet above you and pretty much guarantees that any photograph taken around here has a spectacular backdrop. However, despite its appearance on sunny days, there are 2 very important points to bear in mind before setting foot beyond Ribblehead station. Firstly, the 2-mile stretch of track across Blea Moor crosses such inhospitable countryside that even the road is left behind. All the locations described in this video are a significant walk from the nearest road. Secondly, the countryside here is very high and very exposed and can experience some of the worst weather in the UK. Pretty much no matter what the time of year, it's essential to take with you waterproof, not showerproof clothing and strong waterproof footwear. Before leaving the down or northbound platform that we've arrived on, a quick look to our left shows us the siding at Ribblehead. Originally open to serve the nearby quarry, it's still in use for loading timber trains. Crossing the railway line with due care via the foot crossing, we exit the station past the restored Midland Railway Station building, built on an almost identical template to several others on the Settle-Carlisle line. When the weather turns ugly up here, this can provide an essential shelter. However, it also contains a small shop and cafe and an excellent visitor centre, providing a mine of information about the line and its history. These are open at peak times and are staffed by volunteers from the Friends of the Settle-Carlisle Railway. Both of these facilities are well worth a visit if you have the time. The next step is to head down the approach road from the station, which normally gives you your first view of the famous Ribblehead viaduct. At the bottom of the approach road is the station inn, which can be a very welcome place if you've spent the day getting soaked to the skin standing out on Blea Moor. And in front of the pub is the B6255 Halls to Ingleton Road. To the left up the hill underneath the railway, Ingleton is about 6 miles away, but we want to turn right down the hill towards Hawes. Walking carefully down the side of this road and across the cattle grid, you can see the road heading off across the hills towards Hawes, about 11 miles away. And a little bit further down the hill, the B6479 heads south for Horton in Ribblesdale and Settle, passing excellent locations such as Sellside and Helwyth Bridge. However, on our route to Blea Moor today, we want to turn left just after the cattle grid onto the bridle path. This is the point in the journey where we leave all tarmacked roads behind. The remaining mile of our journey to our 2 locations near Blea Moor signal box is on lumpy tracks like these. Some a bit lumpier and some a great deal steeper. And the remaining few yards of our journey is across squelchy grassland. If you've brought a car on this journey, then this is as far as it goes, and the rest of the excursion is by foot or mountain bike. The track initially takes us across some fairly flattish land on which stands the famous Ribblehead viaduct. Our destination is in the fold of land leading up to Blea Moor on the right-hand side of the picture. Incidentally, whilst walking along this track, you'll notice that the land on either side is extremely uneven. Most of this land was quite heavily mined and poked around with during the construction of the railway, and as a result, most of the land around the track is not very safe at all. Human beings are strongly advised to stick to the track and to leave exploring the rest of the land to the professionals. As we get closer to the Ribblehead viaduct, you start to appreciate what a spectacular construction it is, at 32 metres high and 400 metres long. And it's definitely worthy of an RPN video of its own. Just as the track starts to turn to go underneath the Ribblehead viaduct, there's a junction with a small footpath on the right, marked by some stones and a signpost. If you stay on the track, it takes you under the viaduct and up to the nearby farm, and also provides one of the routes onto the top of Whernside. However, we want to take the smaller footpath on the right, which takes us up to the level of the railway line and onto Blea Moor. At this point in your day out, it's probably worth pausing for a moment and using the view in front of you as something of a barometer. Before going any further, it's worth checking to see which features have been completely blotted out by the cloud. In this view, as you can see, the top of Whernside has disappeared into the clouds, suggesting that Blea Moor is probably okay for photography. However, if you get to this point and everything above the top of the viaduct is completely covered in cloud, then any kind of photography on Blea Moor is going to be extremely difficult, and it's probably about time to turn round. The small footpath keeps us to the east of the railway and takes us across some very lumpy countryside indeed, followed by a short but steep climb up some rough steps. At the top of the steps, it's probably worth pausing for a moment and turning round to admire the spectacular view of the Ribblehead viaduct. Particularly in the late afternoon and early evening, the setting sun sends shadows of its 24 arches racing hundreds of yards across Batty Moss. As always when looking south, Ingleborough provides a spectacular backdrop, and you can see quite clearly the path that we've covered since leaving Ribblehead station. The footpath continues undulating up and down alongside the railway line. Once again, the land either side of the path is not to be recommended. Particularly on the right, the long moorland grass conceals hidden streams and deep pools, and it's an area to keep out of at all costs. Further on, the path drops down under a narrow path under the railway, which we don't need on this occasion, and then rises up to a gate with a stile. Having remembered to shut the gate, this is another point where it's worth turning round to the south and admiring the view behind us. On our right across the railway is Whernside, the tallest of the three peaks, and away to our left in the distance is Pen y Ghent. And behind us to the south is the impressive Ingleborough, which dominates the whole of the Ribblehead area. The closeness of these three mountains has made them a popular destination for walkers, and on this path you'll often meet people doing the famous Three Peaks Walk, where they walk to the summit of Ingleborough, Pen y Ghent and Whernside all in one day. Fortunately, we're not walking anything like as far today, and if we continue north on our footpath, we come to one of the very few trees to be found on Blea Moor. Sitting on the wall by this tree can provide an excellent vantage point over the signal box and the up goods loop. This loop is still in operation for things like reversing timber trains and recessing southbound coal trains. As you can see in this example, where an early morning coal train for the Cotton Power Station has been recessed to allow a Carlisle to Leeds passenger train to pass through. As always, the slopes of Whernside provide a spectacular backdrop. As we push on down the path, we meet a tunnel underneath the railway, clearly marked by the up goods loop signal. If we go past this tunnel and stay on our existing footpath, it takes us up to the Blea Moor signal box, our second photography location, and ultimately over Blea Moor and into Dentdale. However, our first location on Blea Moor is Turf Hill, which lies just to the west of the railway line through this tunnel. Incidentally, this tunnel is worth noting as one of the very few places on Blea Moor that give any kind of shelter from the weather, as you'll find out when it's raining, as this tunnel generally fills up with sheep. As you emerge from the tunnel, having remembered to shut the gate securely behind you, you're presented with an absolutely breathtaking view of the eastern face of Whernside and the track leading down to the farm. However, the bad news is that our photography location is at the top of Turf Hill, which lies immediately to our left. Although at first sight it looks like a short grassy walk to the top of Turf Hill, this is probably the most difficult part of the whole journey. Even at the height of midsummer, the going underfoot is extremely soft and marshy. Although the grass makes the ground all over the hill look quite substantial, it's actually quite difficult to tell firm ground from soupy mud which will happily swallow up your feet straight away. There's also a couple of streams which flow across the hill on this side, which make getting to the top even more tricky. Although turning left immediately after coming under the railway is the most direct route, carrying on down the track towards the farm and coming up the hill from the other side can often be a much less messy route. Whichever route you take to the top of Turf Hill, you're once again rewarded with spectacular views of Whernside and the countryside around. Looking northwards from Turf Hill, you have a grandstand view of the area around the famous Blea Moor signal box. In front of you, you can see the up and the down lines converging into the single track section for the Ribblehead viaduct. On the right of the main line, you can see the upper goods loop with its signal, and on the left you can see the remains of the down goods sidings. The south side of the Blea Moor signal box is clearly visible, along with the stone bridge which forms the second railway photography location in this video. If you follow the curve of the railway under the bridge, and up across the moor into the top right-hand corner of the picture, you can follow the line of the famous Blea Moor tunnel, which burrows some 500 feet underneath the top of the moor. Its path is still marked to this day by the piles of rubble left across the moor from the 7 mining shafts dug during its construction. In terms of warning of approaching trains, the situation at this location is rather mixed. In terms of northbound trains, there's a handy signal in front of the bridge which comes off when they're approaching. However, as with all signals on the Settle-Carlisle line, they protect very long sections of track, and so there can often be quite a good few minutes delay between the signal coming off and the train actually appearing. For southbound trains, there really is very little warning at all, as the nearest up signal is placed rather annoyingly just the other side of the bridge, and therefore out of sight. The only real hope of any advance warning of southbound trains is to keep a very beady eye out for any changing of the points onto the single track section. Nevertheless, this view of southbound trains with the line curving round in front of the signal box has been popular with railway photographers for many decades. There are a number of views possible depending on how high up the hill you stand. Standing roughly at line level produces a view which focuses more on the train than on its surroundings, and this can be particularly successful with a long focal length such as 300mm, as in this picture which has been published in several railway magazines. Standing a little bit higher up the hill gives you a view which allows you to see a bit more of what's going on the track up to and around the signal box, such as in this view of a timber train being reversed in the up goods loop. In all these views, a clear view of the bridge is slightly blocked by the signal box. To overcome this means moving to one's left on Turf Hill, and in order to maintain a clear view of the line, this also means moving nearly to the top of the hill. As you can see, this will give you a slightly clearer view of the area with the signal box and the bridge out of each other's way. However, this does mean that you're now quite a long distance from the signal box, and you will need quite a long focal length to take this kind of picture. This view, for example, of a train of gypsum empties was taken with a 400mm lens. The view looking south from the top of Turf Hill is a rather spectacular one of the single line stretch of track from the north end of the Ribblehead viaduct. The relatively high viewpoint surrounds the train with spectacular countryside for miles around that leads the eye up onto Ingleborough as a backdrop. The problem with this viewpoint though on sunny days is that trains coming up from the south are inevitably lit strongly from behind, leaving the front of the train strongly in shadow. This problem persists even when shooting in the early evening in midsummer when the sun sets roughly northwest. Possible solutions include zooming in for a tighter shot of the train, which makes the contrast levels in the picture easier to manage, or shooting on an overcast day when everything is lit by a dull grey light. To get to our second railway photography location on Blea Moor, we need to return to the Three Peaks footpath, which we left on the other side of the railway. To do this, you need to slither gracefully back down Turf Hill, hopefully not ending up in the stream, and to cross back under the railway using the tunnel. This brings us back to the signpost where we were earlier. If you turn right, the path will take you back along the route described in the first half of this video, back to Ribblehead station. However, to visit the bridge over the line near the Blea Moor signal box, we need to continue climbing north across Blea Moor, and this means turning left up the hill at this signpost. This path very quickly brings you up to the Blea Moor signal box, and can itself be a good vantage point for railway photography, with the slopes of Whernside once again providing an excellent backdrop. However, apart from noise, there really isn't very much notice of approaching southbound trains at this point. Pushing on past the signal box, we can fairly quickly see the bridge that we're heading for not far ahead, as the path takes you over several small streams, and then drops down to cross a larger stream called Hare Gill, via a set of large stepping stones which are just visible in front of the walkers on the path ahead. The main footpath continues north alongside the railway, eventually crossing it just in front of the southern entrance to Blea Moor Tunnel. However, at this point we want to strike off sharp left from the path up the steep bank. This is most easily done by stamping through the shallow and stony part of the stream to the left of the main footpath, and then picking up the lightly worn track which is just visible in the hillside. Alternatively, you can follow the main path to cross the stream by the stepping stones, and then turn off left up the bank, just in front of where the two walkers were in the previous picture. As you climb up the bank, you once again need to be careful, as the ground is nothing like as solid as it looks, with one or two tiny streamlets running across it, particularly near the bottom, and all of them hidden by the tufty grass. As you get towards the top of the bank, you'll notice the stone wall that runs along the top, and in particular the gap in it. If you head towards the gap in this wall, you'll notice that it marks the entrance to a bridge over the railway. And once on this bridge, you have a very commanding view of the whole area around the Blea Moor signal box, with Ingleborough as a spectacular backdrop. This really is one of the classic views on the Settle-Carlisle line, and standing on this bridge, you really do get the impression of standing in the footsteps of great railway photographers down the years. Particularly in the early morning, standing off to one side and using a slightly longer lens gives a rather tighter shot with just the signal box, the train and the signal, and of course Ingleborough as the ever-present backdrop. Alternatively, you can use a slightly wider lens from this viewpoint and let the train come slightly closer to you for this kind of shot. Another useful feature of this location is most clearly illustrated when photographing steam trains. It's very firmly in the midst of the famous Long Drag, a 14-mile climb at a very significant gradient of 1 in 100 from Settle Junction to Aysgill Summit just north of Garsdale Station. The upshot of this is that any northbound steam train approaching this viewpoint is going to be working hard. The only significant downside of this location is that for most of the daylight hours you're going to be looking roughly southward for most of the time, which means that for northbound trains you're often going to be shooting into or close to the sun. One way round this is to use a focal length in the upper hundreds and to zoom in on the area around the signal box itself, thereby excluding the sun and the sky from the picture, and this can be quite effective in conveying the sense of isolation of this location. Another very effective angle which works well particularly in the afternoon is to move to the right hand side of the bridge. This once again arranges the train amongst all the key elements of the Blea Moor area, with Ingleborough as always providing the backdrop. Another excellent viewpoint at this location, which is particularly effective in the morning, can be found by walking off the bridge on the up or the east side of the line and following the dry stone wall down the bank slightly. This once again gives an excellent view including train, signal box and Ingleborough, but gives you a slightly more side-on view of any northbound trains. And if you visit this location in the early morning around midsummer, you can even take photographs where the sun is shining on the front of a northbound train. As you're closer to the train than when you're on the bridge, this view can suit standard or even wide-angle lens shots. If, as quite often happens on Blea Moor, the weather decides to be perfectly horrid, with thick fog and almost horizontal rain, then this viewpoint can be particularly useful as it keeps you relatively close to the train, allowing for reasonable shots even in these extreme conditions. Moving to the opposite side of the line in the afternoon allows for shots of southbound trains, where the bridge forms an effective frame. Finally, moving back to the bridge itself, there's an excellent view to be had looking north as well, where the first thing you'll notice is the up signal which stands right up against the bridge itself. This is one of the features that makes this spot an excellent location for railway photography. You have plenty of advance warning of trains in both directions. This view works well from either side of approaching southbound trains, with the line taking a straight cutting through Littledale. The line disappears under the aqueduct just in front of Blea Moor Tunnel, and the steep slopes of Blea Moor itself provide an excellent backdrop. The straightness of the line and the semaphore signal in the foreground can often be used to make effective features within the photograph. I hope you found something useful in this video and enjoyed watching it. If you have any comments, please feel free to type them in the box below. I hope to be producing some more videos on railway photography locations both on the Settle and Carlisle line and elsewhere in the UK, so please subscribe. And above all, thanks for watching.